Hi, Rachel. Cam Spencer here with the Port of Hueneme.
Hey Cam, how you doing?
Good. How are you? Of
I'm doing well. Thanks for coming on board today. Appreciate it.
course. Our pleasure.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi Carmen. Hi everybody. Welcome. I think we're just
Hi,
gonna
Rachel.
maybe. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
I think we're just gonna give a few more minutes to let we still have a few people coming in right now, so we'll just.
I'm gonna go on mute till you're ready.
Sounds great.
Okay.
I think we have mostly everyone. I think we're waiting on Mr. Richardson, right?
Good afternoon, all. I just spoke with Councilmember Richardson, President Richardson. He's having some login issues, but should be joining us shortly.
Good morning.
Oh,
Good afternoon now.
here he is.
Yeah, I was having some connection issues, but we got it worked out.
Okay, great. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. I thank you everyone for being here this afternoon, especially during your lunch hour. My name is Rachel Wagner. I'm the Regional Affairs Officer for SCAG, representing the Ventura County region. As you all know, when I reached out, kind of letting you know about what we're doing here today. This is something that our newly appointed president, Mr. Rex Richardson, has asked to hold virtual listening sessions in each of SCAG's 6 counties in an effort for him to learn a little more about what's going on in each of our regions, learn about some local matters of importance, and just have meaningful conversations in policy areas and learn about ways that SCAG can support your local efforts and how we can continue to partner and advance local initiatives. So thank you all. We have a very diverse group of organizations presenting for us today. We would also have some of our regional council members on SCAG who represent Ventura County region. So I just want to go ahead and just introduce and welcome them before we begin. We have Mayor Pro Tem of Oxnard, Carmen Ramirez. She's our regional council member. Welcome, Carmen.
Hey, Carmen.
We also have Mayor Pro Tem City of Moore Park, Mr. David Pollock. He's also on our regional council.
That's right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
You, David.
I believe that that's who we have here on our regional council. If I missed anybody, please let me know.
Hi,
We have
Linda
the
Parks
legendary
here.
Carl Morehouse.
Linda Parks, I'm sorry, Linda, I saw your iPhone, so I wasn't sure. We also have
Supervisor.
Ventura County Supervisor Linda Parks. She's our regional council member
Thanks
as
for
well.
joining us, Linda. Appreciate it.
Thank you for putting it together.
Sure
And I
thing.
think, Rachel, we should also recognize we have Carl Morehouse
That's
here.
right. Legendary Carl Morehouse, president when I got involved in SCAG.
Thank you, kids, and I'm happy to help out wherever I can. You know that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. You've been such a tremendous resource to me, so I really appreciate that. Okay, without further ado, we have a pretty good size agenda today. We're going to be hearing from first Maricela Morales. She's the Executive Director for Central Coast United Alliance for a Sustainable Economy, also known as CAUSE. Followed by Maricela, we will have a presentation about the Port of Hueneme from Cam Spencer. He's their Public and Government Relations Manager. And then Mr. Darren Kettle, Executive Director of Ventura County Transportation Commission, will be presenting to us. And followed by Professor Miguel Delgado Helester from California State University. He's going to be giving us a pretty dynamic presentation on housing that a lot of his students had prepared. And then finally, we'll conclude with Mr. Ray Bowman. He's the Director of Small Business Development for Ventura and Santa Barbara counties for the Ventura County Economic Development Collaborative. And we will have some time after our presentations for some discussion and Q&A. And so if Mr. Richardson, you have anything you want to say before we
Absolutely.
begin, we can.
Thank you. First of all, thanks, Rachel, for pulling this together. This is our 6th and final county. We saved the best for last. You know, obviously we are, you know, all separated from one another, but we still have a region to represent, a very diverse region with some of the most significant challenges our region has ever faced. And so the purpose of the tour is to make sure that there's a platform for us to talk about, to learn about the strengths, the opportunities, the needs of each region, of each county, and really within the context of what we should be doing in terms of thinking broader around regional planning, long-range planning, and adopting some of our challenges. I mean, you know, overcoming some of our challenges. David, Carmen's been on a number of these meetings with me. They're probably tired of hearing me talk about the crisis on multiple fronts in our region. So we already know that when we think about resiliency, historically has been, you know, preparing for the earthquake or preparing for, you know, climate, right? But Southern California, you know, California will show you that now we need to, you know, in a global pandemic, we need to have public health capacity. That's a part of resiliency. Like my city, Long Beach, is one of only 3 cities in the state of California with its own health department. And a lot of us count on counties, and we have taken that relationship for granted. And now our communities are dealing with our counties more than ever. So you've got sort of health. You got to think about health. You got to think about our economy. The way that local cities are financed needs to be reevaluated. You know, we're financed in a way that's very entrepreneurial. We're dependent on sales tax and transit occupancy tax and all these things that when the economy shuts down, the revenue evaporates. Well, how do we fund firefighters, paramedics, police officers, the basic needs and basic services that people care about? Those are called into question, and this is a year that we should really think about how local government is financed. We have a climate emergency in California where climate used to be an issue, was on the fringe. It was on the fringe of both parties. It wasn't something central where everyone talked about it, but you have firefighters on the front line of the climate emergency in California. We have firefighters out front. It's no longer a fringe issue. It's a mainstream issue that everyone has to deal with. And we just had another earthquake. You know, we just had a 5.0 in LA County. So resiliency is more important than ever, that we redefine it and that we all come together and talk about what a truly resilient region looks like. A region that is not afraid to talk about racial equity, a region that acknowledges climate, a region that acknowledges that all three parts, housing, transportation, and broadband, are all essential elements to driving a region that is connected and thriving. And so those are some of the conversations that have come out across the 5 counties. I've certainly learned a lot, and I look forward to learning more about Ventura County. Without further ado, let's get started.
Yeah, and just a quick reminder for all of our presenters today, our amazing AV staff has graciously offered to present on your behalf. So we'll pull up each of your presentations, and when you're ready to move on to the next slide, feel free to say next. So thank you. So now we have, I'd like to introduce Maricela Morales, the Executive Director of CAUSE.
Great, thank you. If we could have the slides, please. Thank you. All right, well, welcome, bienvenido. Thank you to SCAG President Rex Richardson for this opportunity, for the other SCAG electeds who have joined in today, and my fellow co-panelists. CAUSE, we definitely are rooted in racial justice, and so I just want to lift up first a thank you for SCAG having approved its racial justice resolution back in July, stating that you stand in solidarity with those working toward a fair and just society through systemic change. And so on that note, feel that CAUSE is very aligned and in solidarity with this resolution. So thank you for that. Next. So today's presentation, I'll be covering a little bit of an overview of CAUSE, some highlights in terms of demographics and poverty from our perspective and our work around social, economic, and environmental justice, a focus on workers, housing, the environment, and concluding with some thoughts on power. Next. So CAUSE, I won't read through all of these bullet points. You'll have it there, but some highlights. We were established going on 20 years. We grew out of the national living wage movement that began in Baltimore in the mid-90s. And the precursor to CAUSE was the Ventura County Living Wage Coalition, which was an all-volunteer effort of a broad-based group of coalitions, organizations. And the founding executive director was Marcos Vargas, who at the time was completing his doctorate at UCLA in urban planning. His dissertation was on bringing together diverse and broad-based multiracial coalitions to advance social justice. I'm a founding staff member myself from the ground floor, started as a volunteer with the Living Wage Coalition in the mid-90s, and was on the ground floor in 2001. I'm proud to say, probably the proudest thing for me is being the daughter of working class Mexican immigrants who immigrated in the 1960s. A first generation born native Californian, Spanish was my first language. Went on to graduate class salutatorian of my class. Went on to Stanford, where I was a pre-med student, and had the honor and the privilege of being the first Latina council member and mayor of the city of Port Hueneme, and currently serve as an alternate to the California Coastal Commission and on the board of the California Nonprofit Association. Some highlights. So we began actually, given these roots with the doctorate, founding executive director, we were actually initially thinking of being sort of an activist policy think tank. And so we started very much rooted in policy research, participatory research, as well as coalition as the means to advocate. But 5 years in, around 2006, we made a commitment that our core work would be around organizing grassroots community members, low-wage workers, immigrants, communities of color here, for them as the experts of their own lives at the forefront of inequality, injustice, for them to be the leaders and at the forefront of the social change that we seek. And so through that, we have been impactful on the redistricting front from the city school board level onto state, Senate, and congressional level districts that were adopted 10 years ago. And there's some other examples as you see in the outline. The other thing about cause is that this region, Ventura County, is different from the urban areas in that we don't have an ecosystem that you find, say, in the Bay Area or LA, where you have multiple social, economic, environmental justice organizations. And so it's been our intent from the beginning, not to build an empire as an organization, but to build a movement. And that includes building up and starting and seeding new organizations. And you have some examples there. I want to highlight the collective work to build the 805 Undocu Fund that in 3 years' time has raised $7 million that is going straight out to undocumented workers in our region that do not qualify for income wage replacement, even though they are workers. They are shut out of the unemployment system. And that we're not in a vacuum. So you see a list of statewide and national alliances that we are a part of, because Ventura County, no county is in a vacuum. And so we're part of statewide efforts as well, and alliances. Next. So in terms of demographics, here you see just, very basic, simple census.gov information in terms of basic demographics of our county. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is that you have Ventura County as a whole, and that's highlighted. And we see that concentrated poverty is within our BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. And so above the highlight area, you see the concentration of communities of color, of immigrants, and of poverty. And so in our social justice work, again, it's very much rooted also in racial justice. Want to lift up, for instance, almost the yin and the yang of El Rio, which is an unincorporated area. It's not a city, and Ojai. So virtually the same number of people, but it's like the two ends of the spectrum in terms of majority white versus majority people of color and immigrant, and you see the stark difference in concentrated poverty and power. So next. Workers. So, poverty is, from our perspective, a matter of wages, that wages continue to lag in terms of what the cost of living, of housing, transportation, food, just the basics, childcare. And here in Ventura County, as in most places, there are many sectors that are still paying at minimum wage. This 39% of workers making under $15 an hour, that's from back in 2015. We won't reach the state minimum wage of $15 an hour until 2022, 2023. Depending on the size of the company or employer. And so we'll see as we move into housing how there's just no way with those kinds of wages that people are supposed to reasonably be expected to survive and thrive. So some of the sectors here in Ventura County, food chain workers, we are in an ag county. 26,000 plus farm workers. They are the backbone of our $2 billion ag industry here in Ventura County. And, they feed the state, they feed the nation, they feed the world. California is among the top 10 exporters of produce, fruits and vegetables. And that's on the back of these workers.
Right.
And they are still at earning very, very low wages. Workers that care for the most vulnerable, the elderly, the physically disabled, blind, are also on the low end of wages. That includes IHSS workers. I mean, they're represented, by a union. You'd think that they would have, greater power to wield, and yet they are still just a little bit above minimum wage. And again, they're caring for our elderly, a population that's only going to grow, over time. Largest home health care services in Thousand Oaks. And I lift that up because there was literally a meeting when I was on city council, when I was part of EDCVC, where there was a representative from the city of Thousand Oaks who literally said that Thousand Oaks had no need for building affordable housing. That there were not people in their city that had a need for affordable housing. There are home care workers, there are service and retail landscapers, domestic workers. And so, in terms of racial justice, in terms of economic justice, there is a need for all cities to step up and to recognize that, that there are workers in their community that are not making the wages that they should be making to survive and thrive. Accommodations, there's some examples there, and of course, retail, right? So these are all, sectors that are on, the low wage and scale that, feed into, the poverty that we see. Next. So life and livelihood on the front lines, racism, COVID, climate fires. There's a quote that I can't recall who first said it, but it was that racism was the tinder, COVID was the fuel, and George Floyd was
the spark.
The spark, yeah. Right. And as of yesterday, Breonna Taylor is the new spark. So, communities, people of color, BIPOC folk that are at this, trifecta of these crises. The UC Med Labor and Community Center has done really phenomenal research in lifting up during COVID time the disproportionate impact on low wage workers, on immigrants of the pandemic. We've been fighting for, as I said earlier, for undocumented workers to be let in to the unemployment wage replacement system. Just by virtue of their immigration status, they are excluded. And so not only have undocumented workers been hit hard by job loss during the pandemic and have had zero wage replacement, it's obviously impacting them personally, their families, but our economies. The entire SCAG region is made up of counties that have high, among the top 10 in number, that's with excluding Imperial and Ventura County in terms of number of undocumented people, nearly the same number of the Ventura County population exist in LA County alone of undocumented people. Nearly 1 million undocumented people in LA County. And so when they don't get access to wage replacement, that's not only an affront to their dignity, to human rights, to their livelihood, their children, their families, but it is a problem for the economic vitality of our cities and our counties. Next. So housing crisis, we did a participatory research project last year. Next. About the report, 590 surveys of renters in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, focusing on working class and immigrant tenants. and also drawing from other data sources. Next. So what we found, that rent burden, we think of San Francisco, housing is so expensive. Rent burden in San Francisco is 39% versus Santa Paula, 59%. I was able to join the first hour of SCAG's joint meeting of Environmental Justice and Public Health Working Group this morning. And the National Equity database that was presented by PolicyLink and USC's Equity Research Institute has information there now in terms of the link between rent burden and life expectancy. So not only are our communities, as you see there, Santa Paula, Oxnard, the same communities that have the concentrated poverty and BIPOC populations seeing higher rates of rent burden. But as you see on the left, it's because it's not keeping up as in one way because of wages. So we've seen wages go up by 8%. And of course, that's not across the board with every single person, every single worker, but rents have gone up by 27%. Next. So as an example, the average cost of a 1-bedroom apartment in Oxnard would be 80% of the average income of a Ventura County farm worker. Next. So what we heard from renters, this is specific to Oxnard, 15% of renters had been evicted in the past 5 years. Almost half had seen a drastic rent increase in the past 5 years. $100 may not be a lot for some of us, $1,200 more a year. But again, when you're working minimum wage, that becomes a dire increase. In addition to 3/4 having experiences of habitability violation issues. Next. So, how do people survive? Well, we know it's a variety of ways, but 3%, just to highlight that one, 3% living in quote non-traditional home like a car or a motel. With the housing crisis that we have, the homelessness crisis that we have, 3% is too much. Next. So moving on to the environment. This is the CalEnviro screen map. And so, the areas of red are the ones that, rate higher in terms of exposure to a variety of different environmental hazards. And so you see that much of the concentration is in and around Oxnard, South Oxnard near Hueneme, as well as on the west end of Ventura. Next. The 2 census tracts that have the highest density are in South Oxnard. And these are also predominantly immigrant, Mixteco, Indigena farm workers, immigrants from Oaxaca, that live there or concentrated there. And that's also right where there is a lot of trucking. It's a trucking corridor. And so it ranks in the 87th percentile for diesel exhaust in California. Next. So this is, straight from the Office of Environmental Health of the state of California. Diesel exhaust particles are known to be the #1 known cause of cancer risk in terms of toxic air pollutants. Next. So here is, it's just another map in terms of concentration of folks of color on the west end. If you can go to the next one, because there's one that's supposed to, oh, there you go, sorry, the arrows. So this is, so you can see, this is a major trucking, diesel truck thoroughfare. And so you see when you step back and look at the whole county, It's right next to the most populous, most highly concentrated BIPOC communities who are exposed to those diesel emissions. So we're really excited, and we're part of our high school environmental justice leaders. We're part of the CARB hearings around the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, the ACT rule that was adopted by CARB. It made world history in terms of being the first such standard to move towards electrification goals for trucks. We were part of that effort. And this is why. It's about people. It's about all people mattering and protecting their health and their future. Next. So end here with just wanting to lift up that we are rooted in communities of color. Staff come from immigrant and communities of color. This is our work to bring about social, economic, environmental justice, which entails having those at the front lines lead that social change. As Frederick Douglass, who has many amazing, inspiring quotes, the whole history of the progress of human liberty show that all concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. That we can have all the data in the world, and at the end of the day, that is not what brings about social change. What brings about social change is the people themselves who are the experts of their own lives, who live on the front lines, having the voice and the power to speak up and to be heard and to be at the table and to see their priorities addressed, whether it be on the housing, the environment, the workplace. And so, CAUSE is humbled to work with our grassroots leaders and inspired every day to work with them to bring about the justice that we believe is possible and that one day will be. Thank you.
Well, certainly thank you for that presentation. What a very strong close with a quote from Frederick Douglass. I think, comparing the counties, it's a great start for Ventura County. I appreciate the depth, the context around equity. That certainly has come through. And I've learned, I knew the agricultural history. I knew that, but I didn't know about the sort of the trucking and the some of the environmental EJ issues there. So, and I'm glad to hear that you participated in our committee meeting this morning. So that's good to know. Well, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Maricela. So next we're going to have Cameron Spencer of the Port of Hueneme.
Hello, President Richardson. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. So behind me, actually, I was able to get the background of the port. So there's a little glimpse of our beautiful seaport. Have you been to our port before?
I've never been to Port Hueneme.
All right. So we are the fourth largest port in the state of California in terms of cargo throughput. So just a little bit of a background on us, and we'll get started here. We do bring a lot of the community members in for classes and tours, and one of our second grade classes, one of the young students raised their hand and said, so let me get this right. You're the port of beamers and bananas, referencing our BMWs that we bring in our large auto sector that we import and export automobiles, including Teslas from California. And then the bananas, we're known as the banana port on the West Coast. So we bring in about 3.3 billion bananas a year to feed the Los Angeles and Southern California and Western markets, as well as fresh pineapple, fruit, and then we do a lot of exporting as well from the agricultural industry throughout Ventura County and the Central Valley of California actually as well. We have produce that comes down, grapes, walnuts, anything grown along the 5 freeway there. So let's get started here. Next slide. All right, so this shows our 2020 board structure and governance here. I put at the bottom there, we are an independent and self-funded special district. This is important because, for example, the Port of Long Beach or Port of Los Angeles, they're actually a department within their city. So they have a harbor department, if you will, within their city. So for example, we are governed by the Board of 5 harbor commissioners there, and they reside within our geopolitical map, which is up there on the top right of the slide. It's that city of Oxnard, the city of Port Hueneme, and then some of those unincorporated beach communities there of Ventura County. And that is called the Oxnard Harbor District. So that's actually our legal name, the Oxnard Harbor District. And we are completely self-funded, meaning unlike a lot of those other ports in the state who receive taxpayer dollars from the city's budget, we do not. So we have to bring in all of our own revenue through the cargo that comes in through our seaport to be able to stay open. And this includes meeting a lot of those aggressive climate change and zero emission targets that our governor just mentioned yesterday, actually, some new goals for that. So we have to fund all of that at the port. So that's why you might see, the ability of some of the larger port complexes to put in, $60, $70 million infrastructure packages. We only bring in about $17 to $19 million a year as our port. And so you can imagine, for example, a $20 million project takes several years of planning and getting those funds together. Next slide. So let's talk about COVID impacts. Obviously, that's on all of our minds, how we've been impacted here. The port was deemed essential as essential workers right off the bat by Governor Newsom, and then the federal administration as well, the president, to keep cargo moving. So like I said, we have kind of two sides to our business. One is those automobiles, imports and exports, and then the other half is that bananas, fresh produce, pineapples, melons, everything import and export wise that would end up kind of on your dining room table. Next slide. So with this, our revenue is about split 50-50. The cars bring in a little bit more revenue for us. And so that's been the biggest hit that we've seen from COVID, because people are still eating. They are still eating the bananas. That's been pretty steady for us. But then right down here in the right-hand corner, 100% of our OEMs around the world, not just around the United States, but around the world, they shut down. Some of them fully shut down manufacturing, or at least partially shut down and switched to, for example, General Motors. We export GM models, and they switched over to creating ventilators for response to COVID. So that happened in March, April, May. And so that dropped our auto import and export business off almost completely during those months. So you can see a projection here from Automotive Logistics. They're kind of a well-trusted source in the shipping industry, that a best case scenario 2020, we'd see a drop of 6%, worst case about a 28% dip. We're somewhere in the middle there right now. So, reopening, consumer confidence, getting people back to work so they can have money to buy a new car, those sorts of factors will play into the demand of our cargo. Next slide. So this first slide here talks about just the automotive trend line that you can see in fiscal year 2019. We had a record year for auto cargo imports and exports. And then our forecast for 2020, that's that last bar there, we're dipping down pretty low, back to probably right around 2013 levels. So not too optimistic about this year. And I also want to point out that when sharing all this information, for us, built into our founding documents as a district, we are here to bring economic and social benefit to the community. So as we look at this, it's the job numbers. These directly trade into those job numbers, as well as a lot of the nonprofits that we support throughout Ventura County. Next slide. So this next slide is that banana, fruit, and veg performance. So as I said earlier, that has stayed pretty consistent, pretty steady. We're hopeful and optimistic we'll see a little bit of a bump in the exports actually here. So that's that dark green line. So exports from throughout California. So that's cautiously optimistic for this year. Next slide. As I mentioned, we only bring in about $17 to $19 million a year, and we have over $179 million worth of assets at our port that we have to upkeep as well as repair and make accessible and ready to use by customers. With that, through our 2020 strategic plan, we identified about $71 million of investment around the port. And so this slide just shows you kind of a breakdown of grant funding we've been successful with. We've put up about $26 million of our own money as support. And then we've also been able to get about $7 million from our private customers to help offset that. We've done everything from a hybrid crane so that would have zero emissions on it. So when we talk about cleaning our air, that's one step forward we've made. Zero emission infrastructure equipment. We're working right now with the Air Resources Board to do about a $3.2 million project on port to be able to provide those electrical conduits and kind of the electrical grid needed to continue to switch over to zero emission equipment.
But quick question. So, how many terminals at your port? Is it one terminal?
So we have two terminals. We have the north terminal, which is kind of up towards the top here, where it says staging improvements. And then the south terminal is down below where the majority of the infrastructure is being made. Just for
about how many, I see you're doing, you're dredging, you're deepening your channel.
Yep.
How large, like how many TU vessels can you handle?
So we're right now right around 1,800 TEU vessels, and then we're dredging to 40 feet deep. So we're not going to be a 70-foot deep harbor, which is kind of what you're more used to, 70 or 80 feet. Our harbor will never be able to accommodate those ships, not just because of our depth, but because of our turning basin. We can't turn the ships around.
Right.
So we're going to 40 feet deep. And this south terminal is mainly what handles our fresh produce, imports and exports. The north terminal is where we do the imports, exports of automobiles.
Got it.
And next slide. It's almost like I had you ask that question on purpose. So here's a picture of our actual dredging taking place. Next slide. And then this is some modernization on our south terminal here. And we actually demolished a warehouse because we used to handle a lot of break bulk cargo, which that's palletized, literally boxes of bananas on wooden pallets. And now it's all containerized. So about 1.5 years ago, our last customer went fully containerized. So we brought down one of those cold storage warehouses to make room for that modernization.
So this is your port's mostly exporting.
No, so we import and export. We are import heavy because of that fresh produce from the bananas.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really grow a banana anywhere else in the US, sometimes in Hawaii, but nothing to actually feed our nation. And then the exports is something we're trying to increase. We do export produce. For example, we import avocados during our off season for growing, and we export them during our growing season. So we do some of that seasonal transition work as well.
Okay.
And then this is that ARB grant that I was mentioning to put in that electrical grid and backbone into our port to really provide that charging capability. As you may recall, with the heat waves that have come down, we actually had the governor's office mandate all of the ports in California twice to try to mitigate any electrical usage during those heat waves to prevent outages throughout the state. So that's something that we're working with his office on. How do we plan to go to this all electric? Is it hydrogen? is it fuel cell? Is it fully electric? So that's something that we're working with the state on. Next slide. Now this is a nice graphic. We were voted actually as the greenest port in the entire United States at the Green Shipping Summit in Los Angeles. So we're very proud of that title. And I'll qualify this in saying that we are a smaller, much smaller port complex compared to LA and Long Beach and even Oakland. But part of the way that we're able to achieve such great emissions reductions and cleaning our air is because we're a smaller complex. So it kind of works in our favor and against us. Against us in that we don't have a lot of that funding and that capital to pour into really, these big projects, but works for us because when we're able to even make smaller investments, it really makes a big impact because of our size. So this graphic just shows a little bit of what we're doing right now. Ship to shore, zero emission trucks. That's part of what we've partnered with our local Ventura County Air Pollution Control District on. LED lighting. We're working to retrofit our rail locomotive. We do own a 12-mile loop railroad around the port that helps move cargo to the rest of the country. So it hooks up with Union Pacific rail line as well. And then also that dredging of that sediment and that sand is going around the corner to Wanimi Beach to renourish and help guard against erosion for the beach. Next slide. So we are seeing results, which is great. So since 2008, we've seen about a 26% increase in cargo growth, and we've seen huge reductions in our air emissions at the port. I mean, you can see SOx 97% reduction, diesel particulate matter, which is that stuff that's getting into lungs and causes breathing issues and asthma, 85%. Just really great numbers that we're seeing at our port as we move to cleaner and greener futures. Next. So as we look here to our trade corridor, Maricela, I think, pointed out in her presentation that kind of red box, those two arrows of that truck route that goes from the port to the 101 freeway. That is a designated heavyweight corridor from the port that a lot of our port customers, as well as other, industries not affiliated with the port use, and that's actually what they've been required to be using to stay out of the residential areas and going through the middle of the city. So that corridor tends to go kind of on the outskirts of those residential developments, which are buffered next to the fields, actually, the agricultural fields. So that's our heavyweight corridor. We also do share half the harbor with Navy Base Ventura County. So there is some restrictions with federal Navy corridor as well with the port. So we have to have that part of the Navy side. And then we have invested about $25,000 from the port into a partnership with VCTC as well as SCAG to do a freight corridor study that's currently underway on looking at the truck traffic, looking at where the truck routes are really going, doing counts, getting really into the details of that so that we can make the best investments moving forward to not only reduce air emissions, but also increase safety. And then we've taken it one step further in we're doing our own internal truck user study as well with our actual port partners. It's going to marry up nicely with that VCTC and SCAG truck study. Next slide. This gives a little more clarity to what I was referencing. You see in yellow here our primary freight corridor that runs right there along Wanimi Road, kind of along the bottom of the screen, and then up Rice Avenue to the 101. And the port did invest over $2 million actually into the Rice Avenue exchange improvement several years ago to make that a safer exchange. So that's something that we're very encouraging of our truckers to use as they go to the 101. And then that Navy Port Strategic Corridor goes up Victoria Avenue to the 101 there. And these green dots here you can see are actually a lot of our customers that utilize the port. So they're located throughout the city of Oxnard and kind of along that primary corridor to the 101. Next slide. Social and environmental justice. Maricela, she gave a great lead into this as well. So here at the port, this is on the forefront of our minds as well. Next slide. Air quality monitors. So this is an actual photo here of about a year ago, the port invested about $140,000 into a reference grade, scientific grade air monitoring system, which is actually the best one in the entire county. And we paid for it to be put on top of the Haycox Elementary School, which is right next to the port, as a way to gather data on what is in our air, what is really making up this air quality. Is it, pesticides from the farms? Is it diesel particulate matter? Is it from the Navy base? Getting some more data and clarity so that can influence how we make the best decisions and invest those dollars moving forward to have clean air. So this is a photo from that unveiling. Next. And this is also data, I'll say, that will be shared with the public. So it's not just going to be the port's data. We're sharing it with the general public as well as the local VCAPCD, the air quality district like South Coast down by you guys. And then opportunity for all. So the port is the 4th largest employer in the county. So we have a graph here that kind of puts together the increases of the economic opportunity that the port provides in 3 different categories. From jobs, you see from 2013 to 2018, about a 44% increase. We generate about 15,834 jobs. Tax revenues that go to the state, local cities, et cetera. And then total economic activity, about 1.7 billion. So we're very proud of that, providing those ladders of opportunity for everybody at every level. So we have internships. Unfortunately, we did a big job fair right before COVID hit in February, but we have everything from entry level, and maritime is still one of those industries where it gives access to people to a family sustaining job without a college degree. And those are further and far and few between even nowadays. And so that's something that we're very proud of, is that they can get involved in the trades. We have unions at the port, and a lot of these individuals that live locally take advantage of those apprenticeship programs and get into that pipeline. And it's been a really great thing for our community. Next slide. About a year and a half ago, our board passed a project labor agreement speaking to this, so that every project at the port that's over $250,000 is built with local union labor. And so we just completed our first project under this agreement. It created 83 brand new jobs. And part of that labor agreement was that we wanted to meet a 33% of local hire, meaning right next to our port, of local tradesmen. And we exceeded that, and it was 73% local hire. So this has set a really great tone for our development projects moving forward. Next slide.
That's great.
And then feeding the front line, so supporting those in need. So typically every year, actually this coming Saturday would be our annual Banana Festival. So maybe next year, Rex, you can come up to Wainimi and come to our festival. We bring about 12,000 people in from the public.
Wow.
We open up the port, show people what we do, and give out a bunch of free banana stuff. So it's a lot of fun for our community, but this year we knew coming into COVID, we weren't going to be able to do that. So we switched gears, and we are bringing the Banana Festival spirit to the community and meeting them where they're at and what they need. So that took a form of feeding the front lines. And basically once a week, sometimes twice a week, we've been spearheading these community port drives where we've been partnering with a lot of our customers such as Chiquita, Del Monte, and our ag customers to actually donate fresh produce to those in need. A lot of those farm workers, Marcella was mentioning, we go out to those farms, we go out to where they are, and we hand them a bag of goodies, food, medical supplies, anything that they need to try to get them through this hard time. So we've done over, gosh, I want to say we're close to 30 of them so far. So that's something that we're very proud of, being able to meet the community in their need right now. Next slide.
I think my 3-year-old and 5-year-old will definitely love banana.
Come on
Right.
down next year. It'll be fun.
All right.
And then just kind of wrapping up the slides here, we do have a big education element at the port. So we did about 120 field trips, K through 12 in 2019. You can see the kids, they love to come out, see what we do. And then we also have a global trade and logistics class. The Port of Long Beach has something similar down there, where that top photo, these are students from the Oxnard Union High School District that come in once a week to the port, and we bring in an industry partner that actually talks to them about what the job opportunities are within maritime and within goods movement, and how they can get their foot right in the door, whether they go to college first, whether they join a union, how they get involved at the port. And these kids, you know, their eyes light up because this is something that they've never really heard of before, and it's not commonplace. Their interaction with goods movement basically is 2-day shipping on Amazon. So this is a great pathway for them. And then we also offer 2 paid internships to the top 2 performing students each semester. So we actually bring them in, we pay them above minimum wage, which is great. Gives them a paid internship to put on their resume, makes some extra income to go on to their next step with. Next slide. And then we do have an innovation and technology piece. So we have an open house every year. It's called MAST, Maritime's Advanced System Technology Laboratory. It's open to the public, it's open to private and public businesses. And we have a partnership under that called FathomWorks as well, where we partner with the Navy next door. About a year ago, we brought in over $2.5 million of equipment to be used by students and by others that want to come and develop different technologies. So we have a 3D printer, we have a couple cutting systems, we have lathes, we have a drone net, a drone cage, a dive tank. And this is open to companies and the public to come in and develop basically solutions to today's most pressing challenges. Next slide. And then as we wrap up here, we are updating our 2030 strategic plan. So we just came off of 2020, and we are doing this in an open and transparent process. We'll have public charrettes coming up in the fall here with the public to help chart the course forward together, as we are a public agency and we want to see that camaraderie come through. Next slide. These last 2 slides just are some of our challenges coming up that we are going to be working through in that 2030 general plan. We do have new at-berth regulations that the CARB board passed on August 26th. So right now, all of our vessels on our south terminal, which are our container vessels, as are the same with every port in California, they're required to plug into electricity while in port. And then now the same is going to be for the auto carrying vessels as well, come 2025. So every vessel, every call will need to plug into some zero emission technology. So this is a photo here from last year. We are the founding host of Clean Air Day for Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. So we're very proud of that, that leadership role that we have here at the Port of Hueneme to help really meet these challenges. And then last and final slide. Yesterday, you may have heard Governor Newsom, his new announcement with some aggressive climate and clean air goals for the state. So this is important to us for two reasons. One, it affects the cargo that we're actually importing and exporting out of California. So he did announce that all auto sales in the state by 2035 must be zero emission vehicles. And so that's going to change a little bit of what our imports and exports look like. We do already import a lot of electric vehicles as is. And then there was also some stipulations about drayage trucks and long haul trucks. So that's something that we are excited for, looking with our project partners, our customers, to how we get there and bringing up about some really good changes and some reductions even further in those air emissions. But this is also something, as I bring us back to kind of in closing, we are a special district. We are completely self-funded. And so we do need assistance in grants, some assistance with CARB, maybe the legislature, to help us bridge that gap between what we're able to pay for and kind of that gap into that next segment. So I think, Rex, in your communications with the other cities and counties there in SCAG, we're not the only ones saying we need some financial help.
Right.
But just in closing, we're excited what the future's to come. We're looking forward to partnership and bringing some of those grant funding to the SCAG region and especially to Ventura County.
Well, great. I'm glad that you included what your needs are. As you know, SCAG has partnerships with MSRC and other groups that we're able to help in certain ways. So I'm glad that you included that, and staff certainly will continue to stay engaged with you and take notes. Thank you for the presentation, Cam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cam. And next, I'd like to welcome Executive Director of Ventura County Transportation Commission, Darren Kettle, and also welcome his two colleagues joining us today. We have Planning and Policy Director Amanda Fagan with VCTC and Manager of Government and Community Relations, Darren Peshka is there. She is. Welcome, everyone. And so I'll let you take over, Darren. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, President Richardson. I should first of all welcome you to Ventura County in the virtual sense, of course. You've had a chance to meet or see a couple of members from my team. I also have a couple of, well, at least one of my commissioners, Supervisor Linda Parks, also sits on VCTC. So she wears a number of hats, but she is one of my commissioners. And of course, David Pollock and Carmen Ramirez have been active in regional issues and in Ventura County for a long time. And I couldn't go without mentioning Carl Morehouse, who also sat on the commission for a number of years. So what we're going to go through very quickly, just to share with you, I of course have regular interaction with your staff. President Richardson, Comey Ajise, and I probably talk at least a couple times a month, if not more frequently. And so there's a very, very strong working relationship between the Ventura County Transportation Commission and SCAG staff. And just by way of a little bit of history, I am a SCAG alum myself. I worked at SCAG for about 4 years or so back in the mid 90s, which was actually at the time when the regional council was expanded. When it got to this giant number that is out there today, that is when I worked there. And
what was the number of regional council members when you were? At
the time, I believe we were at 72 was the number. I know it's up since then. I lived in San Bernardino, in the city of San Bernardino at the time. So I was commuting into 7th and Fig 2 or 3 days a week. So that might explain why I only lasted 4 years. That's a long commute. So if we could go on to the next slide, we're going to quickly just do a little bit of a snapshot of what Ventura County is. Again, VCTC, just by way of really quick background, we are the County Transportation Commission. We are, I'll call it your county, Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority's very, very, very little sibling. relatively speaking. But we do all of the same things that LA County Metro does. We just do it on a smaller scale, but there's still plenty of work to be done. You can see from the slide a little bit about the county. We look at transportation planning from a very comprehensive fashion. While we do have SCAG as our metropolitan planning organization, we take on a lot of those same duties. You did mention earlier the involvement of SCAG and the MSRC.
Right.
We are actually, because we are in a different air district, we don't get to participate in the mobile source air pollution reduction review committee. We have a separate program here in Ventura County through the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District. There's a similar funding source, but unfortunately MSRC is not a place where we can go and sort of shake the money tree, unfortunately. I won't go into a whole lot of detail here. You can see the results for yourself. Again, about 865,000 people, and a little bit about our median household income, and just a nature of what Ventura County is about in that snapshot. Next slide. Probably the most important thing to share with you, for at least to start, and you may have already heard about this, President Richardson. It's certainly a cross I have to bear on a regular basis and working with all my colleagues. We're the only county in the SCAG region that does not have a local sales tax measure for transportation. We have been on the ballot 3 different times, most recently in 2016 with Measure AA, which was a comprehensive transportation investment package that covered everything from environmental mitigations, highway improvements, public transit, rail, and a variety of bicycle and pedestrian. And we got a 58% yes vote. So we still, lacking that revenue stream means that it's difficult to compete for federal and state competitive dollars. In fact, we just can't in some cases. There's Senate Bill 1 programs that we simply aren't eligible for because we don't have that local match. And so we are always at that competitive disadvantage when it comes to that, because we don't have that measure. At this point, I have not got any direction from my commission to try to take another bite at that apple, but we certainly are going to have our challenges without that, given limited resources. Next slide. So just again, this is sort of continues our snapshot. Won't go into a lot of detail here. You will see in the top that we've the number of vehicles that we have in the county, our daily trips. This is all by scale, President Richardson. I mean, we're nowhere near Los Angeles County, never will be. Frankly, in Ventura County, we will take great pride in not being Los Angeles County, and that's not a negative. It's just we take great pride in being who we are. We're a pretty unique place in the SCAG region as compared to the more urban counties of Los Angeles, Orange, San Bernardino, and Riverside. This chart's a little bit dense, but you can see the graph to the right just generally shows the amount of the drop off of vehicle miles traveled in our county following the stay-at-home orders, and the slight uptick as we came out of it. We have seen VMT starting to come back, and we expect that we will certainly see as people do go back to work. And while we are still in the purple tier, as we get to red and orange, we will, and people go back to work, we expect to see we will see congestion come back to Ventura County, but also the entire region. Next slide. A little bit about how we get to work. I think the most important thing in our case is right now, currently, we do have a fairly high percentage of those who drive alone, followed by carpooling. And when you combine all of our carpooling, we get to the point where we're at 11.5%. That's actually down in the last 5 years. We had gotten to a point where we were at about an all-time high about 5 years ago, where we were at nearly 13% of our trips, our work trips, were carpooling, and we're down by 1.5%. You will also see when we get here shortly, there's I'm going to move middle of this graph, our public transportation, both bus and rail. We're only about 1.3% of our work trips use public transit. It's a byproduct of the nature of our suburban county, and that when we're spread out as we are, and if you've had a chance to ever drive through, as you go up the 101 corridor, you'll see communities and then open space, communities, then open space. And that doesn't always lend itself to neatly putting public transit in. Public transit can be most effective in more dense urban environments. And while we do have urban environments in all of those cities, we also generally have not grown as quickly, and we have a bit of of anxiety of actually greater density. And well, we have a couple of communities in our counties, and I will certainly call out Carmen Ramirez and her city of Oxnard that is seeing greater densities and taller housing units, and to a smaller degree Ventura with some density. It is not something that we are that is a very easy sell in our county. And so if you don't have density, it's hard to then really push towards public transit. So anyway, that's a little bit of what we struggle with. I will also turn your attention to the far right-hand side of the slide, the work at home. That 5.7 number, of course, came about pre-COVID. So, you know, that number's gone through the roof in the last 6 months. We'll see what happens when we come out of this whole crazy.
I think this table's going to flip.
Yeah, it just may. It just may.
Right.
We'll see how it goes. We'll see what happens after that too, because it may flip back. Next slide. Again, this is a bit of a pre-COVID. This is pre-COVID data. Generally, what it's showing us is our the amount of hours of delay we have on our freeways, and what is important here is that, again, this is all to scale, but in generally speaking, our greatest congestion is the AM peak and the PM peak. Those hours from 6 to 9 in the morning and 3 to 7 in the evening. You can see our numbers where our delays are doubling in the AM peak as we get out to 2040, and not quite doubling in the PM peak. But for us, what's interesting is the midday period. One of the things in Ventura County you could always count on is if you wanted to get on the freeway at 10 o'clock in the morning or at 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you'd have smooth sailing. As we look out just at the nature of how our trips are going to be changing, we are going to see greater and greater congestion midday, more delay on our highway corridors midday. That is not a, that's not a phenomenon in LA. I mean, if you certainly in your town and looking at the 405 or the 710, I mean, there's traffic all the time, delays all the time. That's not normal for us. And so we're going to start to see that doubling. Now, it's not huge numbers, but it's still nonetheless greater delay. That's not something that we have experienced in the past to speak of. Next slide. So a little bit about where our workforce, the people that live in Ventura County go to work. Most of us stay in our county. Most of us stay, 78% stay in Ventura County. We ship about 18% of our workers to Los Angeles County. And I will say that LA workforce has actually changed where it's going in Los Angeles. And the best way to try to explain where it's gone is we used to have more than 1,000 riders, or about 1,000 riders every day on the Ventura County line and Metrolink to go into Los Angeles. That ridership pre-COVID had dropped to below 700, and we started doing some analysis. And what we found is that where employment was growing in Los Angeles County was actually in the West San Fernando Valley and in the west side of LA, and away from Burbank, Glendale, and LA, which is where Metrolink would go. So our workforce, while we stayed at about 18% going to Los Angeles County, it was shifting to places that were only accessible by car, not by public transit. So we have seen, that's one of the reasons why we've seen the increase in delay on the 101 corridor, is because of, again, not having rail transit through that would be accessible. We do also take about 3% of our trips do go to Santa Barbara County. And so we have, that's our breakup. Coming out of the recession, though, what we found, those 78% of the people that live and work in Ventura County, when they went back to work, they had to find other places where their jobs were, so their commutes went longer than they had been pre-recession, because they were able to generally worked and lived in their same town. That has changed a bit out of the recession, because as people went back to work, they went back to work where they could find work. Fortunately, staying in Ventura County, but not being able to stay in their own town. Next slide. So this is what we call the spaghetti bowl map.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah,
I see the
so
meatballs and
this is every daily trip in Ventura County, and the red color shows the greatest amount of intensity. It shows all of the daily trips that generally are confined within Los Angeles County, with a few going to Santa Barbara, and and then you can see the smattering going into Los Angeles County that are spraying out. But a lot of it is staying right in our county. So the congestion and delays that we have are somewhat somewhat self-induced or self-inflicted. They are all staying here. And again, that may very well be a byproduct, one of our suburban nature, but also the fact that suburban nature we have not yet at this point figured out a way to solve that issue utilizing public transit, so we reduce the number of daily trips. And it goes back to that slide I showed you earlier, just about the fact that we don't have, even on our work trips, only 1.3% are utilizing public transit. Next slide. So just a little food for thought, and this will give you a bit of a flavor of what Ventura County is. Ventura County's land use rules are different than any place in the state and maybe the country. Considering housing affordability, availability challenges, open space, and ag land protections, the de facto alternative to address the region's housing need is density. How do these conditions shape our long-range comprehensive transportation planning and public transit operations and expansion? We are a county that is, and we're very, very proud of the fact that we have not sprawled. I mentioned earlier, I grew up in and worked in San Bernardino County. I moved to Rancho Cucamonga, my family did, in 1967, and the road that we lived on had a 3-foot high curb because it also served as the flood control channel. And San Bernardino County doesn't look like that at all these days. Ventura County has generally kind of enjoyed much of its old history, and we have now got those more urban pressures that are creating congestion and some of these other things. So we are going to be, as I'm going to mention here shortly, we're going to be starting an update to a comprehensive transportation plan where we're going to be trying to hit this issue head on. But by hitting this issue head on, we are going to be very, very careful in how we recognize the role of local land use decision making, because that is certainly not our bailiwick. Next slide. So on cue, the last time we did our comprehensive transportation plan was 2013. It is what led to our sales tax measure that was on the 2016 ballot, Measure AA. We received a Caltrans planning grant. We're going to have about $450,000 to update that comprehensive transportation plan. And I hope through the leadership of Amanda Fagan, our new director of planning and policy, that we are going to tackle some of these more challenging issues, and we'll see where that takes us. We are currently in the middle of 2 studies, the 101 Communities Connected study. I understand that Los Angeles County recently did a similar study. I think it was on the 110 corridor. It's dealing with multimodal elements. It's a matter of the fact that the 101 corridor is not just a highway, it's not just a freeway, but we also are within transit. The Metrolink line runs parallel through the 101 corridor. We have active transportation. We have numerous economic sectors. And so the idea here is that going through this study will also help make us eligible for Senate Bill 1, Solutions for Congested Corridor Funds. Now, of course, the one challenge, even though we're eligible for it, oftentimes that program requires matching grants or local matching funds to be competitive. So there goes my conversation about local sales tax measures to make improvements to the 101 corridor. And then we've touched a little bit on freight. Both Maricela Morales from CAUSE as well as Cam Spencer talked a little bit about freight in Ventura County. We are the county itself is the proud host to the Port of Hueneme. We have been an active player in the freight corridor that allowed for massive transportation investment infrastructure on the infrastructure investment on that Rice Avenue corridor that gets trucks generally from the port to the 101. But then we run into the then what? Where do the trucks that come out of the port go to either go into the Los Angeles basin Or what we're finding is how do they get out to the I-5 corridor to go up through the Central Valley? We have not tackled that question yet. And this freight corridor study is going to be looking at that issue and trying to identify what is the appropriate corridor beyond the 101, because it's not like the trucks just stop there and the freight stops moving. So that's another planning study we're working on. Next slide. So we are doing what we can to support Senate Bill 743 in Ventura County. Amanda Fagan and her team have been working with our cities to support our local jurisdictions along with SCAG on SB 743. It's a brave new world dealing with 743. And we're simply trying to be a resource to our local agencies, and we're going to be providing some model data for our cities in our county to help with that. So it's just we do not have a prescribed role, official role. We just want to be there to support our local jurisdictions. Next slide. A couple of our major, so in spite of not having that local revenue measure, it doesn't mean we're going to sit around twiddling our thumbs. We do have major highway project needs throughout our county. And while we're not experiencing it like we did pre-COVID, we were seeing greater and greater delays on two primary corridors. The 118 freeway corridor, which is the project identified at the bottom of this slide, is the corridor that comes up out of the Northridge area, out of the San Fernando Valley and into Simi Valley and Moore Park, David Pollock's hometown. We have a project that has actually been cleared environmentally and has preliminary engineering done, but the project is going to, at this point, there are no other resources to take that project to the next level. We were starting to see greater and greater congestion on that 118 freeway. Certainly, David Pollock could speak to the level of congestion that happened pre-COVID on the 118 and 23 corridors, which is where, again, where the city of Moore Park is. That project, if we had a local transportation revenue measure, that's a project that could almost move forward tomorrow. It's ideal for a design build kind of project delivery program, but lacking the resources and the ability to bond for future with future money, that project's going to sit on the shelf for the foreseeable future. The 101 project is the proposal is a widening of the 101, likely one carpool lane / express bus lane in each direction for the full 30 miles of the 101 through urban Ventura County. So from the city of Thousand Oaks, Supervisor Linda Parks's backyard, all the way to Carl Morehouse's hometown of Ventura. So it's about 30 miles of one lane in each direction. Rough numbers is in the $800 to $900 million range. That is the commission's highest priority highway project. Every penny we have that is highway, that can go to a highway program, will in the future go to that project. Which is why the 118 ends up, which is second priority, not to minimize it, but there's a recognition of the role of the US 101 for the purposes of the regional network, the regional system, the state highway system, and so forth. So we are about 2.5 years into the preliminary engineering and environmental for the 101 improvement project. Next slide. One of the projects that we did work on, and we've been part of working with SCAG in the past on, is our Transportation Emergency Preparedness Plan. President Richardson, you were going to probably have, given your time at SCAG, you were aware of the Thomas Fire in Ventura County, and obviously some of us are that hit a lot of our community very hard. We have a partnership with our sister agency in Santa Barbara, the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, where that 101 corridor between Ventura and Santa Barbara there's one way in and one way out. So we have been taking the lead role on an emergency preparedness plan to deal with what happens when we have to look at the 101 corridor being closed north of Ventura. It wasn't just the Thomas Fire, of course, but we also had the mudslides that followed after that. that had a major impact and did shut down the 101 freeway corridor for a little over a week. We actually stepped up. We run a bus transit system, and our bus transit system was used with CHP Escort to run 8 or 9 buses every morning up to Santa Barbara with essential workers that live in Ventura County and worked in Santa Barbara County. Next slide.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that fire. It was it burned for like 6 months.
Yeah. You know, it's just President Richardson right now. You know, we pinch ourselves when we say right now we actually don't have a fire, given what's going on throughout California, because we've certainly had more than our fair share between the Thomas fire and the Woolsey fire last year. Just real quick, countywide transit, we have 9 different transit agencies in our county, a county of 860,000 people. We've done some various studies on that. I have certainly gone on record saying that I don't know that this is the best way to be delivering public transit in our county, and said that a long time ago. If you could go to the next slide, please. A couple of months ago, we had the chair of our commission, Claudia Bill de la Pena, who comes from Thousand Oaks, teed up a notion that we should be taking a look at transit, particularly in light of the precipitous fall off of transit in general pre-COVID, but also in COVID, and what's it going to look like in the future. We can't keep doing and delivering public transit the way we've done it for the last 100 years. Not in Ventura County, not in SCAG, and not in the state or the country. So we will be looking at and we've just released an RFP to open up the conversation again about transit revenues, transit operations, and how might we take another look at a better way of delivering public transit. And I'm not going to get ahead of ourselves as to the results of that, but it'll be an all hands conversation amongst transit operators, stakeholder community, people like Maricela Morales and her stakeholders, about how do we look at transit differently? How do we look at it better? How do we look at it through an equity lens? In our county right now, transit is based on where the money is. And I would argue that that is not the way we should be looking at delivering public transit services. We should be looking at public transit services based on where the greatest needs are. If we're going to have economic recovery, one of the best ways towards economic recovery is making sure we address the equity issues and making sure that we have access. And right now, we struggle with that, to be quite candid. Next slide. There's our, just real briefly, the nature of transit in Ventura County, about 1.3% as compared to Los Angeles, 6.3%. I'll give you a little bit of a flavor. We're not that far out of the mix as it relates to the rest of Southern California. San Bernardino County, 1.5% of their work trips. Riverside, 1.3%. And so it is sort of that struggle we have in Southern California and our car culture. And that's just the nature of the biz. Next slide. I mentioned public transit ridership. I won't go into any more detail on that. I think we've had enough of a conversation. But the entire region's transit systems are struggling from a financial perspective and a ridership perspective. I'll be very curious to see what happens with Phil Washington's proposal about a fareless transit system in Los Angeles County. We'll be watching that closely. Part of the reason though, President Richardson, he's able to even have that conversation is the way that they're able to pay for public transit services in Los Angeles County is that 2 cent per dollar sales tax measure that you have with Measure M.
Yeah.
Next slide. Lastly, we're moving. We've been based in Ventura County for as long as I've been here 13 years. It predates me since 1989. We are going to be moving to a somewhat more centrally located part of Ventura County to Camarillo. And that move is just a couple weeks away. So keep an eye out for our new address. Of course, all that we're all working remotely, so I don't know if there's going to be people in my office when we get there or not. Thank you, President Richardson. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for the presentation. We've heard from the transit agencies across the region, and You certainly have a large dynamic system. You're on top of your challenges. I think the region has a very strong transit group of transit agencies, I would say. So thank you so much for that presentation. So I think we have maybe one more, right, Rachel?
We have two more,
Two more.
potentially just one, because our Ventura County Economic Development presenters might not be available. So we'll play that by ear. But for now, we can move in and introduce Professor Miguel Helesater with Cal State Channel Islands to give us an overview of housing in Ventura County with a presentation he provided at last year's annual Ventura County Housing Conference. So Miguel.
Great, and after that, we'll have an opportunity for some exchange and some Q&A with some of the regional council members here. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, President Richardson, for the time, and everyone else for being here with us. Just a little bit of background. I'm an assistant professor of economics at Cal State Channel Islands. I also currently run an institute doing economic research. And so, and thirdly, I sit on the board of a local nonprofit called HOME. And HOME puts together this annual housing conference in Ventura County. So this is work that I did with my students for last year's conference. Most of the data you'll see is going to be publicly available data from the American Community Survey. And so you'll see some of the similar numbers that have already been touched upon. And we'll try to focus on the housing part. But so I just wanted to let you know that this data is not the latest. We're working on new data for the presentation that we will be doing in about a month for the conference. But I don't think things have changed dramatically. Obviously, we're not going to be talking about COVID-related impacts. The American Community Survey comes out with a couple of years of delay. So some of the COVID stuff we're not going to see in this presentation. Next slide, please. And maybe go, yeah. Oh. I guess I gave away the punchline already, but so 2 slides ahead, please. There we go. So what we were tasked to do is we were asked, can you address some housing myths and truths about housing in Ventura County? That was sort of the prompt for the presentation that my students and I worked on. And so the two sort of myths or kind of statements that we look at were Ventura County is an expensive place to live. That's what people say. And we do not have the right jobs to afford housing in our county. Next, please. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through sort of where Ventura County stands. We're going to compare Ventura County to our neighbors. I think a lot of times people talk about, Ventura County being expensive. Certainly, if you compare Ventura County to counties in the Midwest of the country, that is likely the case. But that's not really a apples to apples comparison, right? You're comparing two very different products. And so we'll look a little bit about how we look relative to our neighbors. And then we'll look at some issues with homeownership, which, we know homeownership is not the end all be all, but I think it's a good indicator of health in the housing market. And so we'll look at that. Next slide, please. And I apologize if I'm being brief. I know that we're kind of running a little bit late, so I'm moving quickly. But if you have questions, please feel free to stop me and I'll address them. Just a little bit of the distribution by gender. Our population in the county, females tend to be a little bit older than our males. Next slide, please. Over the past decade, our county has become slightly more educated. So you can see in sort of that mustard color is 2017 compared to 2005. And so you see a lot of the bars toward the top have become larger. So more people are getting, some college or a college degree plus. Next slide, please. Our labor force participation has remained fairly stable between 76 and 78% over the past decade. The unemployment rate, up until about 6 or 7 months ago, we were experiencing historical lows. You can obviously see the recession there where our unemployment rate spiked to around 12%, and then it had dropped significantly, around the 3% mark, again, back in February. And of course, COVID changed that quite dramatically. Next slide, please. And if you can click 2 more times just to get some labels on there. I just want to point out on this figure, we looked at the breakdown of the population that are employed in, so the people that live in Ventura County who are employed and what sectors they are employed in. The size of those dots represent roughly what their earnings are from those jobs. And so what you see is that we have a large share of jobs in sectors like education, health, and social services, where those wages are not really, really high. And we have a small share of jobs in sectors like information and communications, where those wages are actually much higher, right? So we do have a large amount of our population with jobs that don't pay so well. Next slide, please. Here, what we wanted to do is compare employment to the actual jobs that are in the county. And I think it was pointed out in the transportation presentation that about almost 80% of our population actually work in the county, and that seems to hold true here, right? Where the jobs are and where people are working line up pretty well with a few exceptions. So most of our population does in fact work in Ventura County. Next slide, please. We looked at incomes, and I know a couple of the presentations talked about income already. What we wanted to look at here is household income in nominal terms and in real terms. And what we do see is that while our nominal incomes have been rising, our real incomes, if you drew a line from the beginning of that gray line to the end of it, it would be pretty flat. And so in other words, over time, our real incomes have not really changed a lot over the past 15 years or so. Next slide, please. Our population has been growing faster than our housing stock. And so we indexed both of them back to 2010 and just kind of looked at how both of them have moved. And so population has been growing faster than housing to accommodate the population. Next slide, please.
Seems like 2017, there must have been a big housing development or something, a big spike in 2017 on housing production. What happened there?
Well, so, there are a couple of years, and you'll see it in some of the other slides, where I'm not entirely sure. We draw samples from the American Community Survey, and there could be some sampling issues. We're not entirely sure. It may be that somebody knows if there were some big developments that happened in that year. I'm not entirely certain, to be honest. And again, you'll see it here, for example, in household sizes. You can see the renters kind of spike in 2013, and we're not entirely sure why. But this is an important point, right? When housing doesn't grow with your population, one of the things that may happen is that people have to double up, right? If you don't have enough housing for people, then people have to make choices about living with more people. And in some cases that may not be an inconvenience, but in other cases it might be. And this is more severe for renters than it is for homeowners in our county. Next slide, please. Our homeownership rates have been declining, not a lot, but they have been slowly, from about 68% in mid-2000 in the first tens to about 62% now. Next slide, please. Our median sales price has been rising. Our median rental prices have also been rising. Next slide, please. We indexed this to make it easier to look at them. And what you can see is that home prices have appreciated quite a bit. If you look at compared to 2010, our home prices are about 50% higher than they were back then. Our rents are probably about 45% higher than they were back in 2010. So that's quite an increase in those indices. Next slide, please. We talked about cost burdens. I think Maricela touched on this. A household is considered to be cost burden if they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. Next slide, please. And so what we did is that we took the data and we split it by income quartile. And perhaps not surprisingly, what we see is that households in the lower income quartiles are the most burdened. And it's a high burden. We're talking about somewhere around 80% of household incomes in the lower quartile are housing burdened. Much lower, in the higher income quartiles. That's perhaps not surprising. Next slide.
And that's interesting because the way we
break out arena numbers, it should align to where, you need more affordable housing, should align where.
Right.
So, yeah.
And so here we break it out into renters and owners. The owner distribution is kind of more compacted, but it's still the case that if you look at sort of the bottom two quartiles, they're certainly feeling much more of the pinch than the top quartiles in terms of income. So there's some pretty high burdens, not for everyone in the county, but for particular groups. Next slide, please. This kind of gives a summary of that, right? Ventura County has had low unemployment. Again, this is October of last year, quite different picture today. Certainly true that the housing stock has not kept up with population, and our real incomes have actually declined while prices have increased. And so you do find a large share of Ventura County residents who are housing burdened. And of course, as it's typically the case, those burdens fall heavier on the lower half of the income distribution. So our less fortunate are also less fortunate in terms of how much they spend on housing. Next slide, please. And we can go one more. Here we're just comparing California to Ventura County in terms of average age. We're aging faster than the rest of the state. Next slide, please. We are kind of accelerating and becoming more like the neighbors to the north, San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties, and less like LA County. Next slide, please. In terms of education levels, we're similar to the state, so that nothing particularly interesting to report there. Next slide, we can skip, which is unemployment, and I think the pictures now are quite different. Looking at transportation, even though a lot of our population do work in Ventura County, our travel time to work is fairly high. I think we're comparable to LA County, much higher travel time to work than San Luis Obispo County and Santa Barbara County, much higher than California as a whole, excluding Ventura County. So we do have certainly some transportation challenges there when people are spending that much time in their vehicles. Next slide, please. When we look at comparing our household sizes, for renters, we're certainly putting more people into homes. Persons per household is much higher than for the state. Owners are kind of similar to what we see in the state. Next slide, please, where we compare to our neighbors. Again, our renters seem to be cramming more people into houses than our neighbors to the south and the north do. Particularly true for renter households. Next slide, please. Our homeownership rates, this is perhaps the bright spot. Our homeownership rates, both back in 2005 and currently, are higher than all of our comparison groups, which are California excluding Ventura, San Luis Obispo plus Santa Barbara counties, and LA County. Now, if you compare 2005 to 2017, some of the gains we had seem to be going away a little bit. Next slide, please. Our median sale price has been growing sort of in line with what we see in California, but our prices are higher. Next slide, please. We are sort of in line with our group of people around us, LA County, Santa Barbara County, and Ventura County. We're not so different, and I know this graph is kind of hard to tell very much. Next slide, please. Here we just look at the last few years, and again, we're kind of like right in the middle of the pack for our area, which part of our sort of finding from the get-go is that we are a coastal community. We have a lot to offer, and when we compare it to groups that are similar to us, we're not so different, right? Next slide, please. Our median rental price, again, has grown sort of in line with the pattern that you see for the state, but our prices are higher. Next slide, please. When we look at our comparison group, again, we're not really that expensive. Santa Barbara is much more expensive. LA County seems to be more expensive. And so we may just be more expensive than San Luis Obispo County. Next slide, please. When we look at the housing burdens, what we find is that we're not so different from our comparison groups. Again, in all groups, the bottom income quartile is the one that has a larger share of households being burdened. The top quartile quite the opposite. A very small amount of them actually are burdened. Next slide, please. So we have no major differences in age, education, employment, or commuting times. Ventura County has a higher homeownership rates than all areas. But our housing burdens are similar to those of our comparison groups. So our housing burdens are similar to what we see in LA, to what we see in Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo County. Next slide, please. And we can go one more. So what we looked at here was the relationship between homeownership rates and real household incomes. And so what we plotted is, we turned everything into 2017 dollars for all the years that we had data. And so what you have on the top right is Ventura County. And so Ventura County has both higher real household income and higher homeownership rates than all of our comparison groups. Next slide, please. And so we fit a regression line through that. Next slide, please. And what we've done with that is that we estimated, well, if Santa Barbara County and San Luis Obispo County wanted to have the same homeownership rates that we have, how much will their median household income have to be? And so what you can see here is that for our neighbors to have the same homeownership rates that we have, they would have to be quite a bit, their incomes would have to be quite a bit higher than they currently are. So we think of this as kind of like a good thing about Ventura County, but we'll talk about some things that are not quite so pretty on the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. If you look at wages per job, in Ventura County, they have been growing slower than in the rest of the state. Next slide, please. And so what we've seen is that we're increasingly becoming less like LA County and more like Santa Barbara County. And Santa Barbara County, as lovely a place as it is to live in, is a place where perhaps a lot of people buy homes out of their wealth, not necessarily out of their incomes. And so what we have is that we're becoming a county where it's difficult to earn enough to buy a home, although a lot of people buy homes because they have a lot of money, essentially. Next slide, please. If we look at growth in employment, we took the top and bottom sectors by growth. And what you see is that the top sectors that have grown are paying anywhere between $22,000 and $48,000 a year. The sectors that are shrinking are paying $70,000 to $90,000 per year. So we're losing jobs in the sectors that pay really well. We're gaining jobs in the sectors that don't pay very much. Next slide, please. Oh, is there a question?
No, I just think that's interesting, that gap.
And so, relative to our neighbors, we have the highest homeownership rates. And part of it may be because our household incomes are high. But if you look at employment income, what we believe is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to afford housing in Ventura County. And so I think today, perhaps we don't think Ventura County is doing so bad in terms of sort of homes. But I think the future is much less certain because we have not been growing the jobs that are going to allow people to come here, work, and buy a home. We're growing jobs that don't allow that, and that leads to higher concentrations in homes. And so we heard people talk about not wanting density. We are creating density, even if you don't see it. When you're putting two families into a house, that creates density. Whether we're high rising or not, that's creating density in our neighborhoods. Next slide, please. One more. And so, our conclusion is, Ventura County is a beautiful, wonderful place to live. It's a coastal community with a lot to offer, great weather and so on. And so people, of course, make sacrifices to live here. And so again, I go back to, this is why we can't just compare it to, national averages for homeownership burdens and costs, et cetera, because people are obviously going to make sacrifices for things that they like better. We think we're relatively doing okay. And going to the second myth about jobs and the jobs for affording to live here. Right now, we see that our jobs kind of match our population. People are mostly working in the county, and we do have high homeownership rates. But we believe that affording to live here in the long run it's going to become increasingly difficult for those who want to do it just out of their wages alone, right? And so again, you may have a lot of people that come with wealth and of course want to buy nice coastal properties, and that's great, but we have to be thinking about how do we sustain all the services, all the people that work in the industries providing services to those people that want to come and live here. How can we ensure that they also get a fair share at the housing stock? Thank you for your time, and I'm sorry if I moved very quickly, but I know we're kind of a little bit pressed for time too.
Sure. Well, thank you for that presentation. I think it's interesting to see. I mean, you certainly have your own housing challenges, but it's great that you put it in context to sort of San Bernardino County, LA County to understand those issues. But it's you nailed it in the ending. I mean, Ventura is a beautiful coastal county with with plenty of opportunities, and I feel confident, you all will get there. And Channel Islands, when was Channel Islands established? It was like 2000, around that time.
So I think we're in our 16th year as a university. Yeah, so we're pretty young.
Right, I remember. I was at Cal State Dominguez Hills when it was established, and I took there was like a summit that we had there. So I do remember that. It was a student government. It was a CSSA meeting. That's what it was, Cal State Student Association meeting when I was student body president. So good. Well, thank you so much for the presentation on housing. I think it's been pretty comprehensive. Rachel, are we gonna bypass the last presentation or?
We have Dr. Ray Bowman with VCEDC. He's just going to share a very quick overview of the collaborative.
Right.
And so here he is. I'll leave it to you. Thanks, Ray.
Hi, thank you. And we'll start our slides. And also just a quick shout out. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. And just a quick shout out. I'm also adjunct faculty at Cal State Channel Islands, so have to give a shout out there. So my name is Ray Bowman. I'm the director of the Small Business Development Center, which is part of the Economic Development Collaborative, Ventura County. And next slide, please. And again, we're a public-private partnership. We were founded in 1996, funded by the County of Ventura. And so we help coordinate business attraction, retention activity throughout the 10 cities that make up Ventura County. And today, with our partnership with the Small Business Development Center, which is also a regional asset, we become, as an economic development collaborative, very service delivery, very outcome-based. Next slide. So we're in our functions, we're a regional convener and collaborator and strategist on economic development initiatives. We have initiatives around retention and growth of existing businesses through training, technical advising, as well as lending. We promote business attraction by promoting the region's assets, coordinating with the cities, and giving responses to that. And entrepreneurship, we're heavily involved in that, in networking our resources and supporting emerging enterprises and innovation. Next slide, please. So with the EDC, we're made up of several different types of services that we offer. So we have 11 plus loan funds. So our EDC loan program provides financing and loan packaging, as well as disaster loans. We started getting involved in disaster loans back in the Thomas Fire, and as well as during the COVID crisis. Then we have our EDC Grow program. So under that, we do some economic data interpretation. So we get into doing research. Recently, we did a research on mapping the entrepreneurial ecosystem within Ventura County. We did a study on business migration, which looked at both the inflows and outflows in the county, showing that we actually had more inflows than outflows in terms of businesses. We have various strategic initiatives business attraction programs through our county websites, working with the county on that. We do a lot of startup assistance. At any given year, we're probably working with 100+ startups and helping them with their strategies and growing their businesses, marketing and planning, especially with the COVID crisis. We're getting in, we're doing a lot of work around e-commerce and social media, trying to help our clients up their game in those areas. You know, a lot of our retailers and service businesses, that's been a real key to their survival. Legal compliance. So as you can imagine, we help companies navigate understanding what both the local and state level and federal regulations that pertain to their business. So that's an area we work a lot in. Human resource management, operational assistance. We're also as part of the Small Business Development Center network, we also coordinate international trade technical assistance, not only for our county and Santa Barbara County, but for the greater LA area, for the LA network of SBDCs. And we also get involved heavily in assistance to manufacturers. That's always been a huge concentration. So if you think on a given year, we'll see upwards of more than 1,000 clients. About a quarter of those are manufacturers that we're working with. We have our EDC Global program. So again, extending the assistance that we give in international trade. We give technical advice, both on import and export regulations and documentation, financing. We've worked with some state initiatives on promoting trade missions, you know, trying to promote our California manufacturers and producers and getting their products out to global markets, promoting the STEP program. Our EDC Invest program, that program is centered around helping companies that are high growth access venture capital. So we do that through one-on-one technical assistance, setting up small panels for their pitches, and then setting up larger expert panels, as well as trying to link them with venture capital connections. We also coordinate film, so we're the film commission for the county. So within that, we coordinate, we work with the location, the different film productions and helping with location, pre and post production resources, talent crew lodging, film permitting, production, startup and business consulting for those local companies that are working in the film industry. Next slide. We're growth oriented as a program. So through our Small Business Development Center program, it's very much a metric-based program. So it's not only about providing, you know, technical advice to companies, but it's about providing technical advice that leads to growth. So in the history of our Small Business Development Center, we facilitated over 460 million in capital. That amounts to almost 1,000 different loans. We've had economic impacts in the millions each year. I think we're up to about 117 million this year alone. We've serviced altogether about 4,600 clients and almost 500 startups. Next slide. So one of our big impacts happened during this COVID crisis. So again, on a given year, we might see anywhere from 800 to 1,000 clients. Between March and today, we've seen close to 2,000 clients. So we well over doubled our capacity. And then in addition to that, we had workshops, we had, in fact, our call rates went from, you know, a given year, an average would be maybe 40 or 50 a day to over 300 to 400 a day. So we set up a hotline, bilingual hotline and call team to help provide services to all the clients. So all in all, up to date, we've touched over almost 6,000 businesses, and we actively have engaged close to 2,000 right now that are receiving one-on-one technical advice. Next slide. Another one of the resources we put together was our COVID resource guide. During the many changes that happened through the COVID crisis, we were updating this guide literally every day, sometimes twice a day. And our model for our resource guide was actually adopted by other counties as a best practice that was put forward. We made sure that our hotline was bilingual, and the amount of Spanish-speaking businesses that came into our program well over doubled during this time. Next slide, please. So some milestones that we had this year. So again, we went from just appointments and technical assistance to setting up a hotline. We have a team of 9 people supporting that hotline, both helping clients with general technical questions and referrals, but also intaking them and setting them up with our team of advisors, which we have about 40. We created our online disaster resource guide. We also created a county template for reopening. So realizing that a lot of businesses wouldn't understand how to put together a standard operating procedure, we actually approached the county and worked with them to develop a series of templates to go along with the attestation forms that they were filling out. So we actually worked with the county in developing that. We're also now doing statewide research. So we're one small business development center out of 49. So we're actually providing data analytics to all 49 SBDCs as well as the state of California. So those dashboards that I showed you previously, we developed those for the entire state so that they could understand their clients, understand areas of gaps in service, and better describe where the impacts were going within the program. And if you can imagine, the SBDC program statewide services well over 80,000 clients a year. We established our disaster loan fund. We also have done some academic research on the SBDC program. So that was research that I conducted. That was our paper made the Journal of Research Policy. And what we did was we studied the SBDC program to see where it was effective and how it was effective, what those mechanisms are in order to help other SBDCs throughout our network. As you can imagine, we had to do a major shift to converting all of our services to online services. So from online calendaring to webinars to Zoom presentations, and also our outreach to make sure that we're following up with clients. Because what tends to happen in a disaster situation like this is you get a flood of calls initially, and especially regarding the PPP and EIDL loans. But then after that is really when we have to hunker down with these clients, help them with some of their cash flow and strategic decisions. So our outreach has been stepped up quite a bit. We also fostered the development of a program called FathomWorks, and that's a collaboration between the Port of Hueneme, a organization, nonprofit, FathomWorks, as well as the EDC. And through this effort, we've put together a group to facilitate communication between naval surface warfare and our local entrepreneurship community. As well as we set up a physical location at the Port of Hueneme. And this physical location is housing a few $1 million worth of assets that we received from naval surface warfare. And those assets include environmental test equipment, underwater testing, a drone testing area. We have 3D metal printers, clean rooms, CNC machines. So the whole idea to FathomWorks is we not only facilitate communication between our entrepreneurship community and naval surface warfare, but we also provide a lab for advanced testing of some of those concepts and ideas that have been developed. So all in all, it's been a very busy year. We often talk about businesses scaling up, but the EDC had, you know, in answer to the COVID crisis, had to do a huge amount of scaling up. And I'm very proud of the work that the whole team has done within the EDC to answer the call. And it's been a huge effort, but we're very proud of the fact that we've been able to touch so many businesses and have some of the highest impacts in the country as an EDC and a small business development center.
Thank you, Ray. I hate to chime in, but I guess I created too much of an ambitious agenda for us because Ventura County has so many amazing things to offer. So I apologize if we rushed any of the presenters at the end. Hopefully y'all will be able to share your presentations with us so we can take a longer and closer look. And so if anybody has any comments or questions or anything, I know we're running over, and my apologies for that.
I'd love to hear from some of the regional council members. Anything they'd like to add? Carmen?
Yeah, real quickly. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
At a remote location as we all. Hi, Dr. Ray, you're awesome. We had awesome. I last year chaired the Economic Development Collaborative, and I'm just going to whisper this so only we hear. Economic Development Collaborative that you're part of, Dr. Bowman, outpaced many other organizations in larger cities, larger regions. Can I say that? Yes.
Yeah. Yes, you can.
We did very well. We have terrific staff there.
That's great.
And I want to thank everybody for participating. Folks came from the port. I was one of the founders of the cause way back when we were Living Wage Coalition. We've all come a long way. And Darren, I used to be bugging him about getting better options for public transportation, really worked on it, but we've been stymied with funding and the fact that COVID made people not want to get on the bus. So really so much good stuff here. And obviously it's clear we need regional solutions to regional problems. Traffic, air, water, jobs, housing doesn't stay within our city borders. I'm very proud to be associated with it, SCAG. And I want to thank Rex for being a fantastic leader. You're the right person at this time to lead this important organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Carmen. Linda, anyone else?
I just say it is wonderful to be able to highlight our county, and I can't help but look at the positive too, because there are definitely, we're all in tough times, but overall, particularly in comparison in our region, we have less traffic, less pollution, lower housing prices, lower unemployment rates, higher home ownership, which is a big one.
That is big.
And so, not only are we a beautiful place to live, we also are distinguished in having something called SOAR, Save Open Space and Agricultural Resources, which requires a vote of the people to rezone farmland or open space.
Wow.
So we protect that open space. Yeah, the entire county has to vote if you want to take agriculture land in the unincorporated area and develop it. But we also have to support those farm workers. And so we have measures to build more farm worker housing. And during COVID, we've been doing some extensive outreach, both in housing and also in ensuring food and healthcare to our farm workers. But that has been a place where we have done a lot of work. I want to thank EDC BC too, because they did help us distribute $5,000 checks to all businesses that applied, that met our criteria of essentially being a business affected by COVID and being a small business. A lot of good things going on. We just approved our general plan update. And in that update, there was a lot of focus on disadvantaged communities. Mm-hmm. One of the things we did, as you saw on the map that was shown by Maricela, is in those areas of high density in the Oxnard area where you already have in the Cal and Bioscreen that your high pollutant areas, it's also oil drilling out there. So we have in our general plan update required the largest buffer between schools and oil wells in the United States, and that just was passed last week, about 2,500 feet, and also having a 1,500-foot buffer between residential and oil wells, as well as other things in that general plan. For example, making sure disadvantaged communities have access to all the good things that we're looking at, adding a lot more trees into our area, doing more sidewalks, active transportation programs, and then also clean energy jobs, because that's really where we want the focus, and working with our workforce development board on that. This is Climate Week, and seeing what the governor has just put forward to guide to get zero emission vehicles by 2035. We are doing so well, and with the assistance of SCAG and others, looking at putting a lot more electric vehicle charging stations out there. But I think with what the governor's proposing, it's going to be a benefit to the entire region in reducing air pollution, and looking at the good job that the port is doing, and then they have plug-in opportunities for the ships, which is really important too. We noticed that a lot of our NOx actually comes in from the ships, right? So those kind of things, and then certainly with the truck corridors, if you think about it, probably the number one concern that everyone has about high density is traffic. And if we can make that traffic so it's not full of emissions and noise, and particularly with the major trucks too, I mean, this could be an entire paradigm shift. So I'm really glad to see all that effort. And again, thank you for bringing this all together, and appreciate your desire to want to do that, and agree with Carmen too, that we are so fortunate to have you as our president.
Well, thank you, Supervisor, for adding your perspective on the tour. That certainly is helpful hearing from you. I know that, so I know I see Carl. Is there any other electeds, former electeds here? Carl, you want to add anything? We haven't talked in a while. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to congratulate you on your ascendancy to the presidency, and I agree, you're the right person in the right place at the right time. I'm sorry you got robbed of the General Assembly being virtual this year. The pomp and circumstance of assuming and leaving office is always part of the fun. I think you heard very well from at least 5 different areas, and I want to laud Rachel for putting this together this way. It is a lot of information. Everybody's got a lot to share. I don't know how often you've been up here, but I will extend you a personal invitation. Thank you, first of all, for SCAG stepping up and helping us.
Well, I'm a camper, so I actually come up there to camp.
Good.
Well, it's been a while, but.
All right. Well,
yeah.
I'd be happy to, Dal Myers is going to be our kickoff speaker at the home conference where that presentation we all did is going to occur, and thanks SCAG for putting some money for that. But I'm extending, Dal was up here a couple of months ago. I gave him a tour. I'll be happy to give you a countywide tour. I know a couple of good comic book stores. I'm still a DC fan.
That's what I'm talking about.
And anyway, so be happy, put on your mask, come up and spend a day. I'll be happy to drive you all over and show you everything up here that you heard about on statistically, but I can point out more to you. So, but thanks for taking the time. I know how rough this is to get around all the counties. When I was president, I tried to cover as much of the region, which is huge, and a lot of communities, and we all have our little nuances, but you got your challenges, but I think we're going to make it. So again, thanks for participating in this today.
All right. Well, thank you, Carl, and thanks to everyone for taking the time to bring me up to speed on your county. I certainly appreciate it. Again, it's a different year. Everything's sort of different, but I think we're making good progress. We landed the Connect SoCal plan with a unanimous vote, 1 abstention. I don't count it. It wasn't a vote against. I claim it as a unanimous vote. We now are going to be paying attention to implementation and advocating on behalf of all 6 counties for federal stimulus, which includes transportation funding, which would include dedicated freight and funding for ports and all of those things for our region, as well as housing should be a part of this, and broadband. So those things, we know what the different counties need. We know what the different stakeholders, the builders, and all of these folks need. And we have the plan. The plan is Connect SoCal. So now it's about speaking with one voice as Southern California around an agenda that all 6 counties can support. And that's where you'll see a lot of our work focus. This afternoon, in less than an hour, I believe we're gonna be having our a regional conversation on racial equity and social justice. And I wanted to conclude this tour before we begin that conversation, because I've learned so much across all 6 counties about sort of this common thread of equity. And I certainly see Southern California is leading as it relates to acknowledging where we need to improve and acknowledging what gaps need to be closed and how we can all work together with stakeholders, transportation, housing, community groups, education, all together to really make a meaningful difference in the lives of people in Southern California. So that said, I want to thank you all. We're 13 minutes late. I'll give you your afternoon back, and everyone take care. Good job, Rachel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you all.
Thank you.